Hello. This was a presentation, a paper originally given at the International Conference of Games and Narrative on May 15th, 2023. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about narrative in hero shooters and how that plays out in the character selection and battle royale and FPS story worlds. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about two games. The first of which is Apex Legends, which is a battle royale FPS, and then Valorant, which is a tactical round-based FPS. I'm going to discuss character narratives and how they are impacted or not with player selection. So some brief lore of the games to kind of make this all make sense. Apex Legends was released in early 2019 and is essentially set in our world, but just in the slight future, where jump drive technology has been developed and people have been able to travel to planets beyond our current solar system. A sort of pseudo-military organization called the IMC is the one who has this technology, and eventually they have a bunch of veterans that they need to settle somewhere, and they let them populate the frontier worlds, these previously uninhabited planets, sort of like a GI Bill. And then they abandon them for centuries. And when the IMC eventually comes back, the people in the frontier are like, oh, no, we already have our own cultures and systems. You can't come back and rule us. This leads to the Titan Wars, which are the setting of Titanfall 1 and 2, which are the prequels to Apex. Eventually, the Frontier Militia does lose, but they don't give up. They just continue this guerrilla warfare for unknown length of time, till now. And there are some IMC stragglers and deserters who settle in the Outlands, which are even more desolate and remote than the Frontier. So, of course, if you've got nothing better to do and it's constant warfare all the time, why not just join a televised blood sport, which is essentially what the Apex games are. They're Thunderdome. Then we have Valorant, which was released just after the start of the pandemic in 2020. Again, set in our world, but in the short future. Radianite, which is sort of like an element, has been discovered, and it gives humans near magical abilities, though it's definitely not referred to as magic in the game. And it can also be used as an energy source, which creates a little bit of a problem because this mirror verse shows up called Omega Earth, and they have more advanced technology than we do, but a depleted Radianite supply. So they show up and they want the Radianite. The Valorant protocol then gets established and enlisted. People who are Radiant, who have these Radianite abilities or use Radianite to fuel their technology and things like that, are enlisted to kind of defend against these mirror people. The question then becomes, of course, if you're fighting an exact replica of yourself, they look, talk, do everything like you do, how do you know who the actual bad guy really is? So these are what we're calling hero shooters, right? They're a subgenre of the FPS. And this is because instead of customization or just plain old blank slate characters, these are pre-designed set of characters that already have distinct attributes built in. So therefore, the focus is not on customization, but on teamwork between players to select effective team comps. So this is a little bit about how that gameplay works and what you would be thinking about when you're trying to build your team. First of all, character selection for the comp. Apex is mostly playing either duos or trios against a large number of other squads. So depending on what map you're on, you're going to alternate your character to make your team be relatively balanced. Similarly, Valorant, you have the same goal, to have a balanced team, except for it's 5v5. Your team picks 5, the enemy picks 5, but you don't know who's on each team until the game starts. Both games have very similar ability usage. Apex has a passive, an ability always available, a tactical that takes a short amount of time to recharge, and then an ultimate, which takes a longer amount of time. So time is really the thing that that you have to pay attention to in Apex, which makes sense. It's a battle royale, so it's essentially as time goes on, the playable game space gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But Valorant, you have a basic, signature, and ultimate ability that are based on buying them. So however much you have in currency to buy is how much of your ability you can buy. And this really comes down to the loot system. So Apex is a search and steal. You drop down from the dropship, there's loot everywhere. You run and search for good things, or you can kill people and steal their loot. But Valorant has more of a gun buy or economy management system, almost like a mini game within the game. For everything that you do in each round, say killing an enemy, you earn credits, but they're creds. And then at the beginning of the next round, you can use those creds to purchase things like a gun, better guns, more abilities, things like that. And you can also buy your teammates guns. You have to kind of manage and pay attention to the creds on your team, and also the enemy's creds and what kind of weapons and abilities they might have access to. And this is crucial. It is considered BM, bad manners in game, to not buy your teammates or drop a weapon for them if they need it. It's completely considered against the game's gameplay, logic, and communal nature. And then, of course, there's the win conditions. Apex is pretty easy, be the last team alive. And Valorant, it's based on most rounds won, first to 13. And there's two ways you can win, pretty much stealing from Counter-Strike here. You can either wipe the other team, or if you're the attackers, you want to plant a bomb and hope that it explodes before time. Or if you're a defender, you want to defuse the bomb before time. So most games, of course, the narrative is really coming through transmedia storytelling. We have comics and YouTube videos and, cereal boxes. League of Legends even had an animated Netflix show. But the question is really how much of that is actually in the real game. There was a study conducted on Assassin's Creed a while ago, which of course is not comparable, right? I mean, that's a franchise that's existed over decades now, has many spin-offs and such, films made. But the study found that only 1.27% of the respondents had even interacted with all of the media types that Assassin's Creed was utilizing. And I really think that that's probably pretty true. There's so much narrative out there that not everyone's engaging with all of it, or even most of it. Here's where Valorant and Apex really differ. You don't have to explore. The narrative elements are already in-game. And you don't need to go to the transmedial story world to find it. You're welcome if you want to, but you don't have to. So my interest in this kind of comes from a few moments in our recent years that come to mind when I'm thinking about representation in games and narrative in games. Of course, the wonderful moment in 2014 when Ubisoft just said, women are too hard to animate. We can't possibly have a female main character in Assassin's Creed Unity. It would just take too long. Not to mention that they had already had female protagonists by this point. And then in 2018, when EA got a lot of pushback on Battlefield 5 because they had a female character on the front lines of World War II, which was a little bit ridiculous. I think people forget that it is a video game and does not need to be historically accurate, but alas. And even to 2021, when BioWare was still getting pushback about their earlier installations in the Dragon Age and Mass Effect series because of the queer storylines that they had. But truth be told, they're still choice storylines. You could play the games and completely avoid them for the most part. And now we're here, where we have both Riot with Valorant and Respawn EA with Apex basically saying, no, we're going to include a wider range of characters. And they're trying to combat these stereotypes, right? The protagonist has to be this straight white guy. Men and boys just don't play women and girl characters. And America just isn't ready for that diversity yet. We're just not ready. And we do know that the state of games is still not looking great, right? Of the 100 top games from 2017 to 2021, minus the few that had full character customization, because that's, of course, you can always pick to make a straight male white guy in those games if you really want. But besides that, almost 80% of main characters are still white, and over 50%, 80% of main characters are still male, and over 50% are still white. And even if we're thinking about all characters in video games, still over 60% are still white. But something that's really interesting, though, is if you actually go and look at what audiences want, it seems like studios finally need to catch up. Of a study that was conducted in 2021, it asked people to identify their own gender and then select what gender they prefer to play in games. Perhaps unsurprisingly, men said that, 48% of men said that they preferred male characters. Even less unsurprisingly, perhaps, 76% of women said they prefer female characters. But here's where it gets interesting. 29% of the men surveyed said they prefer to play female characters. And 33% of people who did not identify as male or female also want to play female characters. And of course, we see that there's a large section here of people who want non-binary characters, and a pretty significant chunk that just said no preference. But we do know that there's this big caveat, right? Giving players a chance to create representations of people who look like them, this pluralism, means that we don't necessarily get players forced to confront representation of marginalized groups, real true diversity, where you can't opt out. That brings us to our first test case study, which is Valorant. And I kind of argue it has something that's like basically an autoplay narrative. Characters in the game will speak voice lines to each other and about themselves no matter what you do, even without prompting, the narrative plays. And the characters are quite diverse. So I do have all of the characters in these slides, but I'm just going to go ahead and talk about a few of them. First off, we have Jet and Phoenix, who were some of the first characters that are already unlocked that you can play in Valorant. We have a Korean character who speaks Korean in the game. We have a Black British character, and we even have banter between them. That's this lighthearted, friendly, kind of relationship, which is kind of refreshing, like a fun male-female friendship that's not romantic in any way. Two people of color, some of the main characters of the game. Additionally, if you're playing with Chamber and Viper on the same team, Chamber will flirt with Viper and ask to take her out for dinner and dancing. And it doesn't matter if it's a guy playing Viper, you will still get asked out by Chamber. We also have the characters of Cypher and Fade, who have quite an abundance of their lines in their native language, Arabic and Turkish. And so we really are getting a lot of representation of peoples who aren't frequently in games. We have characters who are on the older side of things, really kind of showing us a diversity in who is able to exist in these fighting games. We also have different depictions of femininity. We have Sage, who's like the traditional healing female character, soft, comforting, really sweet, generous, uplifting. And then we have Reyna, right? Her dev name when she was being created was Vampire. She's like the femme fatale. She wants to suck everyone's life force, right? And so we get a range of gender expression as well. We have characters of really differing personalities. We also really saw some great things online about Astra and Harbor and the representation of darker skinned characters. And they even have that same friendly banter between them, calling each other scholars, uplifting each other in the game itself. And remember, this is all autoplay. You don't control what they say. They are talking to each other regardless of who's playing them or what you would like them to say. We even have characters who consciously talk to each other about their traumas and wanting to help out and bring back their teammates from the brink of dread, fear, madness, right? It's kind of refreshing to see, a team-based game where the team actually cares about the team. And last but not least, we have Raze and KJ, Killjoy, where we do get these few lines of them flirting, but literally it's these 3 lines. That's about all we get. Unless you're Riot Games and you decide to tweet out this image, literally tweeted with no caption, no context or anything, but I think it's pretty obvious what's being depicted here, right? But that's still going to that transmedial nature. You would have to know to go to Riot's Valorant Twitter account to see this image in the first place. But then the question becomes, does any of this affect how people pick characters? Are they going to avoid picking Killjoy and Raze now that they know they're in a queer relationship? And the answer is really no. I mean, if we're looking at the current episode and act, the one that's happening right now, we see that Killjoy and Raze are some of the top selected agents. And this is all maps, all modes, all ranks. And something you might also notice is that teams tend to win if KJ's on their team. Even if we look at the highest level of play, competitive, Radiant level, the top 3 characters that people play are women of color. But really, I think Apex is even a better showcase of all of this because it's really an interactive narrative. Apex has an incredibly sophisticated ping system. This is often because it's a free-to-play game and sort of knows that there are people playing that don't have access to a microphone or don't want to. Like every single time I play, automatically mute the lobby. So I'm not really sure how much people talk. Something that's really innovative about the game is that it actually has prompts that appear where you can thank a teammate and then respond with, "You're welcome." Every single game I've ever played, every game I've ever watched being streamed, every pro championship I've watched, people thank and say you're welcome to each other. Really wild. Additionally, when you hit those buttons, your character will respond with something. But it also, when you select a character, they have an intro quip, something that they say. You also have kill quips. So when you kill an enemy, you'll have a line that your character says. And there's also like location quips. So depending on where you're on a map, there might be dialogue that happens, or depending on if you're there with a certain other character. So I have a few little case studies here to look at. So we have these 3 characters here. And we have Bloodhound, who is the very first character that you play, and you're required to play them. You cannot skip the training level without playing as Bloodhound. You cannot play the game unless you complete the training level. And Bloodhound is canonically non-binary. If you want to play Apex, you have to play a non-binary character. Later on, Fuse gets added to the game. His character bio even says that he's a ladies' man and a man's man. And later on, Mad Maggie gets added to the game, who is Fuse's friend turned enemy. But Maggie is Maori and speaks Maori lines in the game. But one thing that's really fun for me and I think is incredibly interesting is that depending on who's on your team, when you hit the thank you and welcome button, your character will have specialized dialogue. And sometimes the dialogue doesn't have anything to do with thanking and welcome, actually. But in this case, between Fuse and Bloodhound in the later seasons, if, let's say, Bloodhound pings some ammo, some extra heavy ammo that you need in your Fuse, and you pick it up, say thanks, you may say a line like, I could kiss ya, get over here. Or, I gotta thank you, slap for that butt, Houndy. Doesn't matter who's playing the characters, he's still going to tell you he wants to slap you on the ass. Another interesting dynamic that emerges is a family dynamic with a love triangle in the middle. So we have Bangalore, who's one of the first characters that's unlocked that you can play. And as you can tell here, she is like a straight up soldier. Like she is the soldier character. Later on, her brother Newcastle gets added, and he's actually a support character. He's also married with a kid, happily married. I don't know how often we have characters in a hero shooter who are just like, nope, I just want to go home and be with my family and just live out my days happily. But we also have the introduction of Loba and later Valkyrie. Now, originally, Loba was trying to initiate a relationship with Bangalore, who just wasn't quite sure if she wanted that yet. And then Valkyrie gets added to the game, and her and Loba are canonically together. In fact, when you ping thank you and you're welcome to each other, they'll say things like, thanks, Angel, you're the sweetest, or that's the kiss of life I needed. When you pick Valkyrie on the character select screen, she has lines like the Apex game, come for revenge and stay for the beautiful women. If you're trying to avoid lesbian characters, too bad. They make it pretty clear. I do think it's interesting that no matter who's on the team, Bangalore will refer to all of her allies as ladies. You will always be ladies. Get a move on, ladies. Rings close, ladies. You will always be ladies. And there's a great line that Loba has when she's doing her finisher, her execution. I think it's called Any Last Words. And she puts the gun under your chin and then she says, you should smile more. I mean, just great stuff. There was originally some backlash with the character of Loba because, you know, she's a South American woman wearing tight-fitting clothing, very sexual. She's a thief. And people were kind of thinking that maybe she was falling into a Latina stereotype. But I understand where they're coming from. But I also think that we can't just ignore that there are women who prefer to dress like this and talk like that. I don't think it's fair to just say that all women in the game should appear like soldiers, especially because the men don't. And I like playing Loba. She's the character I always play. And I identify with her. She has a line where she says, the ring's far and I'm in pubs. Let's go. I very much so feel that. We also have characters like Catalyst, Seer, and Horizon, who can't be ignored, right? We have a doctor. There's actually multiple female doctors in this game. And Catalyst is trans. And not just, in the side, you can go read about her being trans. Oh, no. When she drops from the dropship, one of her lines is, I'm the grim trans witch your parents warned you about. Can't get much clearer than that. I also think that Seer is a really great character. He has essentially what I would consider like the sexual, like male version of the outfit, you know, with his little crop top and exposed shoulders, which I think is just great. We have some other interesting relationships that develop between characters. You know, Caustic is this guy who's basically here because he wants to test his gas on everyone. He wants live experimentation, live subjects. He's totally a villain, but he has a soft spot for Watson. And he's really like a mentor, and he really cares for her. And I think it's such an interesting relationship to have in the game, right? It's not a familial one, but it feels like one. And we also have the character of Crypto, who half of his lines are in Korean. And unlike a lot of the other characters, he doesn't repeat, so he doesn't say something in Korean and then it just is repeated in English. Oh, no. If you don't understand Korean, you're missing half of what Crypto is saying. We also have a really strong male-female friendship between Lifeline and Octane. They're childhood best friends. In the current seasons, they're having a little bit of a tiff. Tiff is a little bit bigger than that, but they're currently having a little bit of a tiff. But, you know, we also have a disabled character. Octane has 2 prosthetic legs, and they are a boon for him. I mean, they're depicted as a positive part of his character, and in fact, they give him a lot of his powers. He is also addicted to stim, so we have a little bit of a balance here of showing a little bit of a diversity of a character and really who they can be. We also have Gibraltar, who is gay in the story. In fact, when you go to specific parts on a map, he'll talk about his ex-boyfriend and how much he regrets things that happened in their relationship. And additionally, kind of like Bangalore, no matter who's on the team, Gibraltar will call everybody brother. Everybody gets to be brother. We have some really interesting friendships that develop, right? We have Rampart, who's actually roommates with Mirage. Yeah, they're roommates. They kind of deny it, but such is life. Mirage is an interesting character because his sexuality is not defined, although you have to go to the paratext to find this. But he does have a quote where someone is talking to him and he goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! Listen, I'm already questioning my sexuality too much. Don't push me." And his ethnicity is also not clear. Depending on which dev you ask, they'll basically say their identity is what Mirage is. So he's white, he's Arab, he's Iranian. We're unsure, but we do know he's mixed. But we get these really interesting voice lines between them. If Wraith and Rampart are on the same team, and Wraith is reviving Rampart, she'll say, "Keep breathing. Mirage will kill me if I lose his special friend." And Mirage has a lot of lines where he talks about his beautiful #1 fan, his mom, who has dementia, and he's in the games for her. We also have some non-human characters. We have Ash and Revenant, who are simulacrums, and Pathfinder, who's just a sentient robot. And then we also have Ballistic and Vantage, who are the newest characters added to the game, so they have a little bit less backstory. But Pathfinder is a really interesting character because he just tries to mimic what humans do. So he calls Ash his girlfriend and Mirage his boyfriend, not really understanding the connotations of those words, or maybe understanding, but not quite getting it. And then Lifeline has a little healing drone. And he's like, "Oh, you're a robot? Well, you must be my child." So we have some interesting takes on family from Pathfinder. Revenant hates and wants to kill everyone. So we actually get a lot of narrative just from playing with him, because he will pick whatever that character's worst horrible fears are and just say it to them over and over. You might hit "thank you," and then he will say "you're welcome" and be like, "I'm gonna kill you." We also get a little bit of discussion of class. We have Ballistic, who is a upper class, very incredibly wealthy British white man. And then we get Vantage, who is essentially a survivalist. She was raised by her mother, who crash landed on a desolate planet with nothing. She even in the game talks about how she doesn't wash her clothes for some reason. But she's playing the games because she's trying to draw attention to her mom's false incarceration. So we get really complex characters, evolving in this game. And in fact, from that same study from earlier, Apex is the most diverse video game that was released between 2017 and 2021. And these are the original numbers, but I've also added below them the current numbers. So we have 12 female characters, 10 male characters, and 1 non-binary character. 16 characters are straight, and 8 are confirmed to not be straight. The asterisk is because I'm not really sure what to do with robots. I'm not really sure where they fall. There are 8 white characters, 13 non-white characters, and 3 that are unknown or not applicable. Is a simulacrum white? But we do know that both Ash and Revenant were white when they were human, so maybe that factors in. So again, the question is, does this impact play? And this one is a little bit more complicated, right? Apex is a free-to-play game with some characters hidden behind a lock, right? You either have to play a lot or purchase other characters. So this might be really skewed data, right? People might download Apex, play one game as Bloodhound, and never play again, right? But really, we see that we have Bloodhound as the #1 chosen character, then Lifeline, a woman of color next, then we have Wraith, then we have Octane. I mean, really, we're still not seeing that character narrative is discouraging character selection. like we would expect if the stereotypes were true. If we're looking at season 16, which is the season that just ended, I think season 17 started like 4 days ago. All lobbies at all levels, which is, still kind of skewed data, right? Like this includes people who may never play again. And we see Pathfinder in the #1 spot, which does kind of tell us that he's probably very powerful right now, which is true. He just got a major buff. But then we still see the same characters popping up: Octane, Wraith, Bangalore, Bloodhound. If we just look at the highest lobbies, Masters and Predator, right? These would be people that they are picking characters because they need to be good. They have to pick good characters because they want to win. We see Pathfinder. We do see Horizon moving up, which does kind of tell us that maybe she's just a harder character to play. She's also behind the lock, so maybe she's not unlocked as much. You got Wraith, Bangalore, Octane, Bloodhound. The same characters are popping up again and again. If we look at the ALGS tournament, the Pro Esports Championship from last year, we see that Valkyrie, Japanese lesbian character currently in a relationship with Loba in the game, was picked 98% of the time. Almost every single time a team had a chance to pick a character, they picked a Valkyrie. The next is Gibraltar, a gay Pacific Islander character, right? I mean, we're seeing that it seems like identity and narrative is not factoring in at all to character selection. Even if we look at team comp, the most common team composition in season 16 was Bangalore, Seer, and Valkyrie. Three queer people of color. So I think that this kind of points us in an interesting direction. And we do have to have some sort of lingering considerations here, right? What is the treatment of gendered characters and queer characters in the game? Are they still being treated poorly, even though they might have men playing them, right? Or straight people playing them? And I think that this really is a question that comes up when we think about characters like Sage and Lifeline, who are the traditional support healer female characters, and how that might play into it. And then also there's this question about digital blackface. I think this is less relevant here because we're not doing character customization. But right, if I love playing Loba and Lifeline, how much is that because of me liking their personality and who they are? And maybe that's a step too far. That question hovers, but I don't really think that applies much because I'm not creating the character, right? I'm really picking the character because I like who they are and I like their ability. We do have some ideas here from two of the devs of Apex. Mechanically, writing-wise, animation-wise, in terms of voice acting, you're not just playing a mechanical set that has a personality. You are that character. And the people who make these games, the people who play these games, they come from all walks of life. The world is diverse. And I really think that this leads to my conclusion here, which is that it appears that player character selection in hero shooters is based solely on gameplay abilities and team comp, and not on a desire for or avoidance of character identity on the whole. I'm a little bit of an exception because I only play the female characters because I want to be a girl. But that narrative story worlds with unskippable diversity may be the way to ensure progress in video games. And here's the last thought I'll leave you with one of the lead developers for Apex, the lead story developers for Apex. I think that everyone assumes you're so busy running around and killing people that there's no time to throw in dialogue, and people thought that the people who play these games don't care about story. And I think we've proven that wrong. Respawn always said, you've got a problem with gay people, non-binary people, don't play our game. We won't miss you. Thanks.